we think about that topic today, I'm excited to be part of this. I would obviously like to thank and recognize the Chamber's corporate partners and other sponsors who invest in the Chamber's core purpose every day to make Overland Park prosper. One quick housekeeping item to note as we begin the program: all attendee audio has been muted to limit distractions and background noise. If there is time at the end, there will be a Q&A portion where you can unmute yourself and ask your question, or you can certainly type it in the chat feature in the control panel at the bottom of your screen. And so now it's my pleasure to introduce our featured panelists. Dr. Stuart Day is the Dean of the University of Kansas Edwards Campus and Dean of the KU School of Professional Studies. He's also a Spanish professor in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. At KU Edwards campus, Stewart leads a team of faculty and staff administrators focusing on developing and enhancing workforce-oriented and transfer-friendly academic programs, partnering with KU Lawrence and KU Medical Center, and building and deepening relationships with area community colleges and other community partners. He helps lead KUEC's innovation and DEI efforts and other initiatives supporting KUEC's non-traditional student population. We also have Sheri Gonzales. She is the Vice President of the Kansas City Civic Council and is Director of KC Rising and works with businesses, organizations, and leaders to promote system alignment, identify gaps, and monitor the region's outcomes and key economic indicators. Her career has focused on economic and community development in local, state, and international contexts. Sheri Gonzales is an experienced leader in the community, economic, and workforce development. Lastly, Dr. McLeod is Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of Johnson County Community College. Prior to joining JCCC in 2016, Mickey was the Associate Dean of Instruction at Metropolitan Community College, Penn Valley, where he oversaw the Office of Career and Technical Education, becoming well-versed in workforce initiatives and regional education issues. Thank you all for joining us. We look forward to a robust discussion, and now I'm happy to turn the program over to today's facilitator, Tracy Osborne-Olchin, your Chamber's President and CEO. Good afternoon, Tracy.
Hi, Michael. Thank you so much for sponsoring today's series on workforce development. We're very excited to have your partnership from United Healthcare's perspective. We know how important the workforce is to your company, as well as to all of the other companies in the region. In fact, I'm really excited about today's panel discussion because we have three incredible experts in the region. And we know that this topic is incredibly important to all of our companies. Hardly a day goes by when we're not talking with one of our member businesses or with a prospective business to the region. And really their top of mind question is about the quality and availability of workforce. In fact, that was the #1 critical issue noted in our membership survey this last fall as extremely critical to the success of our members' businesses. It is top of mind, even in the midst of a pandemic, making sure that people are able to attract and retain the very best talent. And so we're concerned about that, not just today, but always into the future. And so that's why we've asked Stuart and Sheri and Nikki to join us today to talk about how we're looking at the workforce of today, as well as the workforce into the next generation. So I am excited about having the three of you here to share with us a little bit about workforce from both the education perspective as well as the business side of the equation, because it really is a partnership. And we've got both education partners on the call with us today, as well as those from the business community, because we want to know how we can make this as much a synergy as possible. So I want to talk first initially about the landscape of workforce development and what that looks like, and perhaps about how our approach has changed from those traditional methods of the past to what it looks like today. And so Stuart, let's start with you, and then let's go to Nikki, and then Sheri, have you kind of wrap it up in talking about the landscape from the business perspective.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. I just want to start out by saying thanks to everybody who's here to watch and listen. And Thanks to you, Tracy, and everybody else at the Chamber for organizing this event and including us. I'm looking forward to learning as much as I have to offer. I think when you mention, moving from a more traditional model to a more workforce-oriented model, and I think that kind of mirrors my move from the Lawrence campus, where I've been for many years as a Spanish professor, as a senior vice provost, other roles, department chair, and seeing kind of a research residential campus and how it operates, and then moving to my role at Edwards, where I'm still kind of learning what it means, but seeing those differences from the point of view of an outsider is just incredible. I mean, in Spanish and Portuguese in Lawrence in my department, we don't get together a group of leaders from the community and say, okay, what can we do better? What is it that you need? Whereas on the Edwards campus, we have our series of boards. And in fact, Carolyn McLeod is on this call. She helps a lot with that coordination. We have all these boards where we listen to people and say, what is it you're looking for? What do you need? And how can we help? And I would say that's the biggest change from my perspective. I want to give my colleagues a chance to answer that too, but it's an impressive change. It's a good one, and it makes you part of a community in a way that I didn't really think was possible.
Well, I'll start by echoing Stuart's thanks to everyone on the call for your time and for offering us an opportunity and a platform to share. And I think from where I stand, one of the largest changes that we've taken toward workforce development is the recognition that workforce development is longitudinal. Historically, workforce development has been about simply providing a core skill to an individual and then getting them into the specific job that was being asked for by employers. Like Stewart, we have a number of boards. I right now have about 92 advisory committees that meet for different programs across the college, and being a gen ed individual who stepped into career and technical education and workforce helped me to be able to see where there needed to be cross-pollination between multiple fields. As we look at the current workforce, the need longitudinally is going to be for folks who can scale up into leadership, because we see a lot of retirement, a lot of folks nearing the end of their career, as well as the mobility between fields for an individual to be able to take transferable skills from one place to the next. And so one of the huge changes that we've really taken is to try to create a cross-pollination of skills that are necessary to be successful in multiple fields, so that we're teaching folks how to be career ready, not just job ready. And that change has been a major one for us.
Yeah, so I'll also echo thank you for convening this group and the opportunity to share. I'll be sharing a number of things that we hear in different avenues, both at the Civic Council and predominantly through Casey Rising. So in response to this question, there's no way I can answer without mentioning COVID, right? And so, which we're still all living through. But it has been fascinating in my role to see the impact that COVID has had. Pre-COVID, I'm sort of a nerd. I was reading things like the Fourth Industrial Revolution and how you shape the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and those kinds of ideas of these seismic changes coming on the horizon. We're predicting back in 2016 that those were going to be 10 or 15 year out trends, right? It's coming. 10 years felt pretty quick. And what I have to tell you is COVID just accelerated that, right? What was a 10-year trend is actually happening right now, right? The robots aren't just coming, they're here and they're in Kansas City. So COVID accelerated things like remote work, obviously, right? I am coming to you from my dining room. but it also accelerated e-commerce, which was already a trend, but we have seen double X improve, like growth in that. We're not going backwards. We might see some recession, but this has been a seismic change that is a forever change, right? It's a shift, distance learning and telehealth and so much more. And so in many cases, jobs that existed before aren't coming back. Right? We are going to see job growth, but it is going to require different skills and different sort of opportunities. and so predictive analytics, machine learning, all of those in recent discussions have been mentioned in healthcare and logistics, in warehousing and life sciences. It is across all of our industries. What we also know that COVID did is it increased our unemployment. The loss in jobs was deeper than the Great Recession. It also happened in a single quarter, which is faster than anything we've ever seen. Now, we're also hoping that it comes back faster than the Great Recession, and we're starting to see signs of that life. And if we are on the current growth trends, it will, but who knows, right, what the future holds. So what's the impact is that we need to develop new skills, what we also refer to as uniquely human skills, those skills that are essential to jobs, and that there is that skill gap between what is actionable in the education setting and what is actually needed in the business setting. So things around communication, critical thinking, executive function, proactivity. We will have from Casey Rising a report that will be released in April on this topic. It was funded by DeBruce Foundation, and the work was conducted by the Urban Education Research Center on behalf of Casey Rising. But it shows that gap and exactly what we can start to do about it.
Sheri, I think that is absolutely fascinating. I can't wait to see that report. And I'm thrilled to be on the Casey Rising Steering Committee. Because I, in the face of all of these challenges, it's hard to keep up to date when trends that you knew were someday are actually now. And so I think that leads us, perfectly to the very next question, which what are the challenges? And so, Sheri, I'm going to let you kind of kick that off. From your own organization's perspective, what do you think the biggest challenge is as we try to move into the future of workforce development and prepare not just your own organization for that, but your organization as part of, the macro unit of the region, because none of you operate alone. One of the things that I observed the most when I moved here was the symbiotic relationship, particularly of JCCC and KU Edwards, and then how you all work together with the K through 12 system. No one operates on an island, but that means that that's just that many more units that have to kind of work together as we move into the future. And the future right now is rapidly coming. So Sheri, why don't you kick us off with what those challenges look like and suggestions for where you think we need to go.
Yeah, so this doesn't just come from me. I mentioned in the last answer these sort of industry 4.0 skills and capabilities that are needed. What we did in November of last year is that we convened a few hundred individuals across various sectors, and these were people in charge of strategy for their company. And we asked them the question, how has COVID impacted your work, right? What was fascinating is that in 2015, Casey Rising did the same thing. And we didn't ask about COVID. We actually then asked about disruptors. We specifically said, what about AI? What about machine learning? What about 3D printing? And what I heard predominantly from those conversations is, it's coming. We asked the CEOs, but I'll probably be retired by the time it gets here. This time we said, what about COVID? And that's where we heard AI, machine learning, robotics, 3D printing. So I'll share with you in a second, I have slides, what each of the sectors sort of said in that area. But what I also want to share is that our projected recovery in Kansas City from this recession is ahead of the nation's sort of trends. We expect on this current path that we will recover in Kansas City by Q2 in 2023. According to, so Casey Rising every month has actually done a economic forecast. And according to the most recent economic forecast, sectors such as construction, IT, healthcare, life sciences, those are all poised to experience double-digit percentage growth by Q4 2025. What we also know is we don't have adequate pathways in these necessary stackable credentials for those areas. But here is what we heard from business. And sometimes it displays well and sometimes it doesn't. So what do you all see? Hopefully not a ton of mess on my
We
screen.
see the traded sector data, just the
Okay. Just that slide. Okay.
initially that slide. Okay, now we see the sector summary for transportation.
Okay. I'm trying to
Could be
get
a little bigger though.
Here we go. Did that help?
There.
So if you look just in the middle area where it says strategic direction, this is the part I want to highlight. So like transportation, we convened a number of leaders in that area, and they said, what has COVID affected? And what is the strategic direction that they're going? Increased e-commerce, consumer demand is going to continue to grow, not go backwards. Changing purchasing habits, including increased order and size, faster speed, expectations are really that speed, right? Which requires more technical solutions for things like predictive analytics of supply chain, and then added cold storage. What I did find interesting, I mean, we think about cold storage for things like the vaccine, but one of the trends pre-COVID and only accelerated in COVID was that we in America are ordering more of those prepackaged dinners, and they need more cold storage so that we can get those to our home. So HelloFresh, right? And all of that. What about in warehousing, right? What we heard in warehousing was really that there was, again, accelerated e-commerce, which required new solutions for space, logistic management, and talent, that there have been major changes in retail demand and omni-channel sort of distribution that's fueled that growth. And the future is going to include more robotics, micro fulfillment solutions, and next gen retail. In manufacturing, COVID did sort of slow some markets in this sector, but those were rebuilding quickly. Others sort of pivoted to new business models that served their growth and where there was growth industries. Technology like AI, 3D printing are already disrupting this sector. And these are all Kansas City leaders, not national leaders. COVID also on microelectronics sort of interrupted production and access to components from overseas. But there is this sort of speed that became more important than low cost. And they've increased usage of consumer electronics and will continue to grow and evolve this industry. Internet of Things becomes more important as electronics become more connected. Healthcare, COVID accelerated outpatient and telehealth solutions. They've expected and needed a shift to social equity of health, and then improvements in the social determinants of health. Technology continues to impact the industry, including analytics, predictive modeling, and AI. Life sciences, you can see AI, machine learning, and new information technology is disrupting the sector, and potential opportunities to take on national security in this area. And then biologics, this is really a wave of the future, right? We just learned about some of this through the vaccine, but the first biologic was insulin for diabetes. Kansas City has really shown that we are a leader in this, but we need to have more manufacturing that is happening locally, and that could be a key differentiator. And there's some advancements in automation that are continuing to impact the sector. Cybersecurity, there's been a lot of consolidation of this across the sector as there's new threats that have emerged, and there's more and more automation and machine learning that is continuing to disrupt the sector. We've been looked at, in Kansas City, we often talk about how we're the sort of bread and butter of back office support. And so we even talk to contact centers, and they are not exempt, right? COVID really had them doing more remote work. and they don't think they're coming back the way that they were. There were other technological advancements like AI, which are going to continue to grow in the industry. And so these are just a few examples of how your business, in answer to the question, how has COVID sort of impacted your work, told us technology changes that change workforce needs and demand.
So thank you, Sheri, so much for, that is a great establishing foundation, I think, for our entire discussion. So Stuart and Nikki, how did those challenges, disrupting the entire business environment, how does that translate to the challenges that you all face as educators? Do you see that kind of as a one-to-one challenge, or does education have a whole different set that, this now layers on top of that?
Well, I'll jump in first, and then Stewart can get, because his is going to be a little bit more really a taller view than mine even. This is not a one-to-one, it's more of a 1 to 10. Every time one of these things happens in the industry sector, it tenfold impacts how we educate, because it trickles down into the need for new credentials, new services, new courses, new teaching, new approaches to the knowledge, because it's been reconstructed with things like AI, with things like biotechnology. These are ever-changing fields, and education does not move at the same speed that business moves, because while business has a number of constraints on it, there is an even larger constraint on education, because what they learn from us has to count in very specific ways. And that can only happen if accreditors have processes that look at what we're teaching and verify that it is correct. So we're always many, many, many months, in some cases a year or more, behind a new emerging technology, because the fields that actually give us the gravitas for our credentials to count for folks to go out and get those jobs have to work that grist through the mill before it gets down to us. One way that we've tried to work on that at Johnson County is we've partnered with our folks over in continuing education to start preempting some of these things by taking the outcomes for newer courses that we are creating and having those outcomes be a part of hourly trainings that are offered through continuing education, with the hope that we can eventually build back as folks continue to finish those certifications in 10, 20, 40-hour chunks. We can then go back and give course credit for those later after the courses have been aligned properly. We can look at the outcomes that those folks have met and say those outcomes are the same outcomes for this course, where you can come in and take an examination for a prior knowledge assessment, and then we can give you the credit for those things without having you be behind and then making you come take the class to catch up long after we've already passed that point.
Yeah, I'll just add, I agree and appreciate with what Sheri and Mickey have said. And, in addition to all of that, there's the very personal side of this. So the economy is recovering. It's going to be a very uneven recovery. So tracking our individual students, working even more closely with the community colleges, especially Johnson County, to really make sure that we're addressing issues for our students related to affordability, reaching out to them to make sure that they are still on track has been critical to us. So, your question was, what are some of the challenges? As the economy turns around, how do we reach those students who've dropped out? K-12, 12 plus. They're delivering our groceries and so much more. So how do we get to those students? And then I'm hoping Sharon Graham is on this call, and I'm hoping she might type into the chat some of the boot camps that she has. She's our vice provost at KU for lifelong and professional education, as many of you know. And I think those boot camps are one of the ways that we've been able to respond a little more quickly to needs, and also really think about those students, whether they're upskilling, trying to get back into the job market, whatever the case may be. This is a really quick, effective way to do it. And it's not just KU, it's our neighbor down the road, K State Olathe. They're offering boot camps now, and I think it's very positive for the community.
All of those programs, from the boot camps and to, the use of continuing ed, that Mickey was referencing, those are all very entrepreneurial approaches to workforce development and being responsive to the needs of business, both whether you're talking about programs that eventually lead to course credit or, simply the layering of certifications, which I think we're going to talk about just a little bit later. I want to address partnerships with K through 12, and maybe at the same time, talking about the point that you were making, Stuart, about the uneven recovery of the economy, and making sure that we're capturing people who, whether they were coming out of the K through 12 system, or maybe somewhere in the K through 16 system, or maybe they're just needing to upskill because the job they had, as Sheri referenced, doesn't exist anymore because it somewhere in the last year or so got left behind. How can we make sure that all of these partnerships are working together so that we all kind of know what the moving parts are, and that we are as nimble and flexible as possible as the employer needs are changing. Understanding the constraints that Mickey addressed, that we've got to make sure that the processes are in place, but that we are knowing what the needs are going to be so that we can start those processes as early as possible to be responsive to what the gaps are going to be. Does that make sense? So whoever wants to grab that up, probably from the education perspective first.
Well, I would say that the first thing that we can all do, and that question is kind of multifaceted because it includes the partnership from K-12 forward, but also in looking at how business feeds into education. So from K-12 forward, we have to begin to think about our students. We've gone through a bit of a revolution in education over the last 20 to 30 years, where there has grown this sense that students, as customers of education, have a Bill of Rights, have these. But my approach is kind of the opposite. Students are not my customers. Society is my customer. Students are my product. My job is to turn out better students, better prepared, ready to take their place in whatever fields they decide to venture into. And so for us, we have to start with that K-12 pipeline and working with those schools to look at what are they teaching, how are they teaching it, and then how can we effectively jack into students who are ready to move forward. How can we get to them earlier? As a high school teacher, I learned that the way you start prepping a student for college is you get to them by 7th grade. As a college administrator and professor, I learned that the way that you really know whether a student is ready is by their sophomore year. You have to start looking at where their skills are being built. So there has to be that place where we as educators work with the K-12 system to understand how they're teaching, what they're teaching, and what are the benchmarks they expect students to be able to make. And we need to help them set benchmarks. One of the things that Sheri's been a part of, that I've been a part of for the last few years, is the Casey Rising People Driving Committee, which really has looked at what are marketable skills for a student to have on their way out of K-12 and into either a workforce situation or a collegiate situation. And how do we quantify what we're trying to teach and whether or not we can benchmark whether students are getting that knowledge appropriately. And then from business, we have to continue to engage, the work that Stewart and his team do, that my team does here in engaging individual business partners and coming in to be a part of all of those advisory committees, is so that we can keep a finger on the pulse of what these business professionals see coming. One of my big questions at every one of these meetings that I attend is, what do you think you're going to need in 5 years? Don't tell me what you think you need today, because it's already too late for me to deliver that. I need to know what you think you're going to need in 5 years so that we can prep our coursework, our degree plans, our outreach to the community to share with students the skills that you're going to need in 5 years, so that when you get there, we have a ready workforce waiting for you, as opposed to always playing catch up, which historically has been the approach that we took in the higher ed sector.
I'll jump in a little just because you specifically mentioned higher ed, but then I'll give Sheri a chance to talk. But I think flexibility is critical, and I think listening to the community is important. And more than any other inquiry for a program, recently we've had inquiries about degree in 3. So how can a student take the college credit they have from high school, do 1 year at a community college, and then finish off at KU? It saves them money, it gets them out into the workforce. And I also think it's interesting to remember, when we're talking about workforce, we're talking about helping students who have a tremendous desire to improve society. That's what we're seeing now. So it's fascinating to see which programs grow and thrive. It's interesting to see the students interested in biotechnology because they want to create cures in the future. It's interesting to see the students who want to go into social welfare because they see the issues around them that they want to take care of. And maybe we're in this specific space because of our past experiences. Mickey was a K-12 teacher. I was a middle school teacher a long time ago. And I think that's one of the connections that we have to this particular space, where you're really matching up students with careers.
So I'm going to mention a couple of specific initiatives that we have been working on. Mickey started to talk about it, right? Since 2015, Casey Rising had been talking about, how do we do this at scale and how do we do it equitably, right? Because it can't just be for a few, can't just be for the ones who can learn to navigate or have parents to navigate it for them. But it needs to be for all. So it has to be at the system level. And so out of those conversations, actually what is now known as real world learning birthed, right? And so there was this focus intentionally on high school. Why high school? Because if you look at what the output of high school is and you change that, you automatically have to change what happened before that, right? What happens from pre-K to kindergarten to first grade all builds up to your expected output from high school. And so it was a leverage point, but it's also a leverage point for what comes after, right? You do see institutions of higher ed sort of adapting to what the student expectations are. And if the student expectations are sort of, I want to be able to interact with business more. I want to be able to see this in context and know that my learning has applicability outside of the classroom, not just be lectured to, right? You start to see those changes in higher ed as well. And so it was considered a leverage point. So if you're not familiar with real world learning, they have a goal that 100% of high school students by the year 2030 will graduate with at least one market value asset. Those market value assets were again based on sort of research. What is it that really adds value to the student when they walk across that stage? Not just us in the community, it does add value to us for them to be prepared, but to that student. And so there's 4 things that were identified. The first is sort of college credit. And so that college credit is something they can use to accelerate toward a degree. when they do graduate and decide to go to a 2-year or 4-year degree. But beyond that, what it also does is change the mindset of sort of a first generation student that maybe didn't have the opportunity around their neighborhood or their dining table to hear about jobs or careers, and sort of has a limited view of what's possible for them. When they finish a college level course in high school, whether they go on to a 2-year or 4-year degree or not, they have a different view of what's possible for their future, right? They start to go, if I can do that, what else could I do? Right? Maybe I could do this other thing too. And so that was one of the market value assets. The second is an industry recognized credential that is regionally vetted. So both states, the federal government, and the departments of education and the school districts invest millions and millions of dollars in these IRCs, in purchasing equipment and training the teachers, in making sure students get the licenses and have access to the tests. And at the end of the day, what the hope is that those students actually end up with a credential that is recognized by industry. But what we have found is that that is rarely the case, unfortunately, right? We're making these huge investments, and it's almost like false hope, because some of those things that they're earning in high school aren't considered at all in hiring by employers. There's only a few of them that are. And in fact, in 2019, Casey Rising did a survey of employers and found that there's a number of things that are used for hiring that aren't on the curriculum at all, right? And so there's this mismatch. And so we added the language regionally vetted, because we want to give real priority to the things that are used for hiring. So that's creating real pathways to real opportunity for these students. The third area is work-based learning. And so when you get to be in a business or engaging with business people, again, it's that context, but you start to spark something like, I might want to do that someday. And then you try it and you're like, yeah, I definitely want to learn more about this. Or just as valuable, you go, I never want to do that again. I can't imagine spending the rest of my life doing that. That's also valuable, right? And so those work-based experiences help to build a social network and really build on resumes and what students sort of see as viable pathways. And then the last of the four is entrepreneurial experiences. We are not just trying to create widgets to go work for somebody else, right? And this isn't just like, well, some people get to own a business and some people get to be leaders, and then other people just go and collect a paycheck, right? No, we want that mindset that regardless of where you're at, whether you own a business or work for someone else, that your creativity, your sort of critical thinking, the way you approach your work should always be innovative and entrepreneurial. And so those entrepreneurial experiences build that in to the curriculum. And so that is one way that K through 12 is sort of integrating in the workforce development picture.
That's a great way, I think, to summarize some of the ways that that we can be nimble and flexible, and also provide a great experience for not just K through 12, but K through 16 and even beyond. So I want to take it just a little bit farther and talk about the specific ways that business and education can work together. I want to call everyone's attention to the chat. All of your teams have been fantastic about adding websites and links to all of the great opportunities, the workforce boards and the advisory councils and such. And so, if you want to take a second to look at those, and of course we are recording this, and so it will be on the Chamber's website after probably by tomorrow morning, so that you can look at all of this information later. But I want to go to the next question, which is specific ways that people can engage. Obviously, we encourage all of our teams to specifically engage in some of these advisory boards and such, and several members of my team do that throughout the region. But let's talk about all the different ways that employers can be involved. Providing some of those real world learning experiences. Sheri, I want to start with you. I know you have a slide, and then I want to give Mickey and Stewart an opportunity to provide, some of that fill in from both of the institutions' abilities to say, here's what they would recommend today. You know, if a business called and said, hey, I really want to be involved, to give you that 5-year picture. You know, they're concerned about, you know, the future of tech or the future of whatever their business is and how can they be of help. And so you can be thinking about, you know, what your response would be. So Sheri, let's start with you.
Okay, you are correct. I have a slide. We're going to try this again. Hopefully
you have the best slides.
Clunky. Thanks. I just do it because it's easier than trying to explain it with my words. So let's see if this comes up. Okay, and I don't know why it always defaults to this. So we'll fix it. But so, you know, the question is, how can business engage? And we have spent, I mean, I've spent probably the better part of the last decade thinking about that question. I will say that at Casey Rising in 2018, in partnership with Kauffman Foundation and Casey SourceLink, did a couple of things. We convened a group of about 45 individuals that represented the workforce development pipeline, both in school and out of school, as well as business. And we sort of said, what would that career readiness framework look like? What would engagement sort of look like? Now, there are lots of places that have developed sort of a framework. We borrowed from them, and then, as Kansas City likes to do, we made it our own, right? And so there are 3 major categories of what this career readiness framework looks like and what business can do to engage in that. So like the first category is explore. This is where an individual is just sort of developing awareness of what's even out there, what's available. And so these are the activities of what that might look like, right? A workplace tour, either virtual or on-site, career fair or presentation, informational interview, mentoring, job shadow. All of these things allow the opportunity for exploration and awareness building. But then after awareness, we need to go past that into engagement, right? What do you start to apply that learning? Well, you might be a guest instructor in one of the educational institutions. There might be project work, like a client-connected project, performance feedback. You know, sometimes students want to just exhibit their work and hear from professionals about how they did, almost like a performance evaluation, in giving them that context, simulation. And then you take it again, another step further to immersion, right? This is really substantive work experiences, internships, on-the-job training, either summer or after-school apprenticeships, teacher externships. If you're an employer and you are on here, please consider allowing teachers into your workplace. That one teacher touches hundreds, if not thousands of students. And so what you invest in them actually has exponential sort of opportunities for growth and impact. And then there's other things, sort of support in the ecosystem that you can provide as an employer, right? You can provide your facilities or equipment. You could provide input on curriculum design. You can do sort of job and career path information, the kind of questions that Mickey mentioned that they ask. And you could do advocacy on behalf of the educational institutions. You know, we've been given an opportunity in the last year to hold up educators as heroes. I don't know that we have totally done that, but we definitely are aware how important they are. I can't tell you how excited I was for my own children to go back to school, right? It allowed all of us much needed relief and opportunity to learn. I mentioned a little while ago our essential skills report. I'm about to give you guys a preview of coming attractions, right? We are actually categorizing these skills in 3 buckets. We did not create this research. We're borrowing that and just using the framework in our own. But there's these perishable skills, which is actually where we tend to focus. These are the technology skills, the industry recognized credentials that are maybe vendor specific, a platform or a programming language. Those things have to be updated frequently. Their half-life is maybe 2 years, right? And then there's these semi-durable skills, which tend to be field-specific technologies, sort of industry-specific knowledge that you learn on the job. These do change, but they change less frequently, maybe 3 to 5 years. But then the durable skills, the stuff that's sort of a base layer, the roots, those mindsets and dispositions, that way of thinking, those have sort of a half-life of decades. And so we are saying these essential skills, the colorful things that are the roots of this tree, are the things we really need to make sure are integrated in all of our learning environments, because they will have applicability going forward. And so here's a little preview. I call this the money slide of where the gaps are, right? The dark sort of slider is where the expectation lie. And the light gray is where the young professionals told us they felt prepared. And you can see that in every category of essential skills, there is a gap. So the question that Tracy just asked is, what can business do? Here's the recommendations that we heard from the community, right? That what business can do is commit to curriculum and community connections. We are working with Real World Learning to create an essential skills micro-credential, and you can help us co-create that. Partner with an established system to measure progress at the metro and district levels so that we know how we're doing on this and leading toward better proficiency. Provide work-based experiences similar to what I talked about before for both learners and teachers at all levels of the learning continuum. And creating developmental pathways in hiring, promotion, and retention so that it isn't just tied to a credential, but really allowing true workforce development. So those are some of our ideas of how business can engage.
Well, and to kind of piggyback on that piece where Sheri really hits on a student needing those skills to be honed in a real world setting is something that we've spent a lot of time and energy on. Johnson County launched 2 years ago what we call our student agency, which allows us to connect students who are in our programs with real world business projects. We started by working with our Small Business Development Center, and we've since kind of opened it up to business partners across the community who might be interested. They come in, they have a particular project as opposed to longitudinal work. Here's something we'd like to get accomplished, something we think a student could learn from, but that also gives us a product that we could carry away. We work out with that company a contract for that student and assign a faculty member in whatever the specific areas are that they need to focus on. And we provide that opportunity for a student to really have what is effectively a paid internship for an individual product where they work with real professionals, have an opportunity to hone those skills, communication, teamwork, understanding what's being asked of them in a project, being able to facilitate, time manage, all of those pieces. And in the end, the business gets an actual product, the student gets a real world opportunity to learn something and gets a product that becomes a resume builder and a skill builder for them. And we kind of act as a central repository of those folks who are learning those new skills. We've had a lot of them in accounting, computer science. One of the boards that I work on just contracted with students in our marketing and web development department for some social media campaign work. And so it's a way for us, not necessarily, we're not a business as an educator, but we are trying to create for students an understanding of what the business world looks like and connect them with seasoned professionals so that they can get comfortable in that environment and being professionals themselves. Because we can teach all sorts of things, but until a student synthesizes and practices those things, that knowledge is too abstract.
Yeah, that just to build on that a little bit, that's it's fascinating to hear different colleagues in different spaces here today. We have some new KU advantages, where we're trying to kind of meet this gap that students feel, that employers feel. And maybe Carolyn, if you want to pop, if Carolyn and I is on this call, if you wouldn't mind popping that link in the chat. I'm also going to share another one though, that's KU Talent Ed. If employers really want to take that next step, one opportunity is to have your own cohort. So if you're a big business and you really need a flow of cybersecurity folks, we will help build a curriculum for you while you employ them. They will be much more likely to stay with you when they're finished with the program. There's a little video of it. I'm not trying to sound like a salesperson, but these are opportunities for students and for businesses to take that extra step. Sometimes in higher ed, so out in the business world, we hear industry saying, students aren't trained the way they used to be. And some of that's true. What we think a lot in higher ed is, well, that's true, but industry doesn't make the same investment in training students or their new employees because they might switch careers 5, 6 times, who knows? So we really have to find a way to meet in the middle. And I think we're all trying to do that in many different ways. And it's an interesting challenge that we face. But yeah, take a look at that KU Talent Ed, where you can bring your own cohort in. You can help us design the entire curriculum and really help your employees upskill.
I think both of those programs, Stuart and Mickey, are very creative. And, I think it's a new way to look at the challenge of providing, maybe the old internship, that I would have gone through, gosh, I don't know, more than 30 years ago. So, just to Sheri's point that she made a couple of questions back, helping you find not just what you want to do, but maybe what you don't want to do. That you thought looked really sexy and cool, but maybe just wasn't, a great opportunity, but, helped you to, not make a decision to chase that job that, might have taken you several years if you had actually gotten it, and then have to go find something else in a completely different field. So, those were excellent opportunities, but, we've got to, as business, take that chance and bring those students in. And so that's an initiative that the Chamber is going to be working on to help businesses expand those internship capabilities. We've got so many businesses that offer that, but we've got a lot that don't do that because they don't know how, or they think it's too hard. There's a lot of regulation involved, or they simply have never done it before. And so we're going to be working with some partners to make those opportunities seem like they're a little bit more reachable. So I want to expand into, kind of the next realm of, how do we make that next leap? So, we're training students, we're giving them opportunities. We've started to fill those gaps, but then, we come to that next challenge. Now they've got the training. How do we make sure that they think that staying here is what they want to do, so it's that attraction and retention of the talent. And so, Stuart, you and Mickey are, kind of in the hot seat there, or at least you're in the right seat to be talking to students who, they come to you for advice, or at least they might be telling you things that they might not want to tell anyone else. And they're saying, maybe this isn't where I want to stay. Someplace else looks cooler, and they maybe are giving you really candid feedback that I think our audience would really like to hear about, maybe what the challenges are of Kansas City in general, or Johnson County, or our employment base. What do you think the challenges are of our region, and what we need to be doing together to be more welcoming and to be more attractive as a community, so that we are a first choice for students to want to stay here? What do you think we could be doing to be more of a magnet to attract talent, not just keep our own here, but to bring others here who aren't from here?
Well, I think that the first two things that we need to do is we need to recognize what the experience of living in Kansas City actually is. For us, we look at it as a number of things: a great place to raise our children, a great place to, quite frankly, to be employed, because we've already kind of built our roots here. But the hard part is recognizing that we are, a wonderful arts community. But you don't find a lot of 20-somethings who are interested in ballet and modern art. And the things that we take such pride in, we also have to open our eyes to the fact that as an urban entity, we need to be more in touch with the urban art scene, with newer music, different styles of dance. We need to try to create and encapsulate for people the thing that we find to be most welcoming is not necessarily always welcoming to folks who are 20 years younger than we are. To some of them, it's kind of boring to frame it as my 21-year-old daughter would say. And so I have to think very, very openly when I talk to students about what this place offers. I always frame for them what they have an opportunity to be a part of building. We have to frame it as an opportunity for them to be a part of the reframing and reshaping of Kansas City as we move forward. Not that they have to move into the lifestyle necessarily that their parents live, but that they have an opportunity to help the region embrace a newer, more vibrant, different approach. And that's something that I think takes that personal touch from mentorship, from educators, not simply talking about the job, because what we know about a lot of millennials, Gen Zers, a lot of the Generation A students, they're not interested in the single family home and the finances. They plan on 4 to 5 possible careers across a lifetime. They want mobility, they want challenge, they want freshness in their experience, as opposed to that kind of stability and focus that was kind of the hallmark of what kept those of us who are Gen Xers moving forward.
Sheri, did you want to jump in?
Yeah.
I can afterwards.
Okay, so I have a couple of thoughts on that. I mean, some of it is that I think we have a long way to go on just talent development and realizing the potential of those in our community. And what we do know is that to retain them, we need to be a community that has green space and public transportation and arts, which is some of the stuff Mickey was saying. Place matters greatly, right, to talent attraction and retention. But one thing I would also mention, and this has been a conversation at the People Driving Committee, which Mickey serves on, is that we also need to have fair and equitable hiring practices. And we don't necessarily have that. And why do I say that? And I say that because all you have to do is look at the outcomes, and you know that there is bound to be some reason why we are not seeing educated Black and women individuals in our community get hired at the same rates, paid at the same rates, promoted at the same rates, right? Like there's something going on there. And one of the conversations recently in the People Driving Committee was about unintentional barriers that we might be setting up. So I just posted an article that was shared with that committee, sort of about, you want to hire Black college students, like here's some mistakes you're making that you may or may not be aware of that is unintentionally keeping folks out. You might be eliminating them before you're even actually considering their skills and what they could add value to your company. So those would be some of my thoughts, is also taking a look at ourselves and what we're doing intentionally or unintentionally.
Yeah, I think I share those views, and I think that's a really good point that Sheri makes. And we don't have time to go into it now, but looking specifically in Overland Park, affordable housing is to me an issue when I talk to students. However, if they've had a micro internship or an internship, if they're already connected to local industry, they start talking a different talk and sound quite interested in sticking around. So sometimes it's just that opportunity. And then it's a little bit of a mindset too. Just KU is a little bit different in this sense, in that we have a lot of students who want to stay in in Lawrence. We don't have to try to convince them. However, we just don't have the opportunities. There's a big move for students who decide to go to the metro area. They're still close to Lawrence. Some of them still live in Lawrence, but we can lead them to those opportunities. And so I think career-wise, that connection between Lawrence and Edwards for KU is critical, and it's something that we're working on pretty vigorously at KU.
Thank you. You know, excellent points from all of you, and I think that you know, many of the topics that you all touched on, each one of you, from you know, the diversity, equity, and inclusion, the placemaking, just creating a vibe for our community, and then looking at how we are just talking about opportunities and creating connections between generations and pulling business to education. All of those things were parts of Forward OP, our community vision several years ago. And so you'll find some of that in the Chamber's strategic plan. You'll find it sprinkled throughout our community, and, you know, of course, in each of our educational institutions as those strategic goals. And so, you know, I think that's something that we've got to hit even harder given the pandemic. You know, not that those things took a back seat, but you know, we have to make sure that we hit that even stronger as you know, communities figure out what their own recoveries look like, and we make sure that we are robust and inclusive. And, you know, as Sheri pointed out earlier, that recovery might be uneven, and we want to make sure that for us it is not uneven. We do have time for a few questions, and so I don't see questions in the chat, but I'll scan that very quickly. If anyone would like to just unmute and ask a question, we certainly can take your questions personally. I do want to point out this was the most robust chat of participation that we have had, and so I encourage you to check that out and pull some of these links. We also will pull them and send them out as a document because there is so much helpful information in here from the teams at KU Edwards and also from Johnson County Community College. But if anyone has a question, please either put it in the chat and then also unmute and you can ask that. Questions? Seeing none, I'm going to ask one final question of the panel. So what's the most exciting thing for each of you? You wouldn't be doing this work if you didn't love it. And so I'm going to have you make a concluding comment about what you love most and what you're excited about for the future in the workforce.
I'll go ahead and start. I think for me, it's the same as it's always been back since I graduated college and started teaching in South Tucson Middle School. It's all about the stories. To me, that's always the excitement. And the stories change over the years, but having students reach out and talk about how they have transformed themselves and been transformed is kind of the one constant in our field, and the way it happens changes. It's not always predictable, but that's why it's always exciting. And that means too, if students are happy, it means that we're really growing what we do. So, you know, Edwards is up, I think, 13% this spring. Now we're small, so you know we're in the shadow of JCC and other institutions, but growing fast. But that growth is excitement, knowing that that growth is hundreds and hundreds of stories from students whose lives are being changed.
Yeah, I think Stewart really has hit kind of the most important thing is seeing those students. And for me, you know, I'll be honest, I was a nerd who just kept going to school. I love synthesis. I love being able to see how multiple points of view or new ideas from different fields can coalesce and help me think about and see the world differently. And when I see students make those connections between things, when a student recognizes that their interest in social media dovetails with an interest in sociology and anthropology and an understanding of what's going on in their community through their own community engagement and personal volunteerism. When you meet one or two students who really have started to kind of put that together and you see the light bulb go on, it means that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, that we're creating positive change. And if we can keep those folks in this community, we will have added something to this community that's very, very important and help build a foundation for the future of where we're headed. Those are the things that I think bring me the most joy. And being able to see those movements kind of spread throughout the community as I've watched. I've only been in this role for a little over 4 years, but I have watched the demographics start to shift in this county, in the areas that we serve. And having come from working at Penn Valley in downtown Kansas City, Missouri, I really get to see how Kansas City is evolving, and knowing that we have had a piece of that and a place in that evolution and growth by helping create the place for conversation and the learning and knowledge and understanding that has brought all of these folks together and helped them start to build their families and their lives is huge. I don't think there's anything like it anywhere.
Sheri, any
Yeah,
final
so my answer
comments?
My answer to the question, you had mentioned in my bio, I've had the great privilege of working all over the world, right? I did international development for a series of years, living overseas, and I consider Kansas City home. And so, and I'm raising my children here, right? And so what I consider sort of exciting is that I get to be part of creating the future that I hope they choose to stay in and feel like they have an active opportunity and role and participation in. So that's like a personal side, is that I get to invest in my hometown, right? But also one of the things that's very exciting is that in the position I'm in, I get to see lots of what's happening in other cities. And I have to say that Kansas City has an incredible amount of things to be proud of, right? Like, we tend to be Midwest nice and humble, and all of that is great, but that doesn't mean that we can't be also proud of where we're excellent. and so what I get to also see is where we're excellent. And so, like, one of the things I mentioned in real world learning, there isn't something like that happening anywhere else that I know of at the scale that it's happening, with the amount of school districts that we're doing. I mean, that is transformational, and we are a leader in the nation creating innovation. There's similar things happening, sort of, I would say what KC Scholars is creating as a workforce development engine at scale is unique in the nation. I mean, there are people coming to us saying, how do you get 17 institutions to work together toward some kind of common end? We can't get two to talk to each other, right? And so, I mean, those kinds of things are exciting, and Kansas City is leading. And so I don't just say this, I believe it. Like, I think our best days lie ahead. Do we have challenges? Absolutely. But I believe we're up to the challenge. And so those are the things that excite me.
Well, I absolutely agree, and just being with all of you excites me. I think that each one of you is an incredible talent, and it was a great day when each one of you decided that you were going to be dedicated to this work and be dedicated to Kansas City. And so we are indeed fortunate to have you working for our future, and I thank you very much for being with us this afternoon on this panel. And I know that everyone else is just as pleased. Looking at the remarks in the chat, I think we had some even quote-worthy moments from each one of you, and certainly a lot of data that we are going to be able to use for the future. And so I thank you on behalf of the Chamber. Michael, I'm going to ask you if you have any final words as our sponsor, and appreciate you very much from United Healthcare for being our sponsor this afternoon. I will turn it back over to you for any final comments and adjournment.
My only final thought is, as I look at my staff, a bunch of them are nearing retirement, and I got a whole succession planning problem. And so make sure you send me all those links. I really appreciate everybody's comments, really insightful and thoughtful. So we're just happy to be the sponsor, happy to be part of the conversation, and looking forward to what good comes out of this. Thank you all for your time.
Wonderful. Well, we'll look forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you for joining us today for this Powerful Voices. And thanks once again to our speakers, and have a great, fabulous day, 70 degrees. So see you soon.